Hey guys, Doug. So today we're going to be talking about visual confirmation or sight confirmation and trigger control. So in this video, we're going to be discussing what these two things are and how I perceive them, at least at this point in time. And then we're going to go through some dry fire and live fire techniques we can use to work on these principles. So it's important to understand everything I talk about at this point is dependent on your consistency of inputs. So what you're looking for is having a perfectly consistent everything every time. And of course we can't do that perfectly, but that's the goal, right? And then the building that consistency over time is how we're able to do these things. So first we need to cover what the sight confirmation levels are. There's three. This is not my idea. I got this from people smarter than myself, of course, but I'm bringing these things to you from my perspective and through my development. Obviously, that's the purpose of this channel. So we have level 1 confirmation, which is going to be your color confirmation. So whether you're using dots or sights, so on the pistols I'm using for this demonstration, these are the Glock 47 and Glock 20 that I've been talking through, but typically we're talking about dots. At least I am, because I will talk about dots in a little bit. So we're just looking for confirmation of color while we are visually focused on a small spot on the target. So this green circle here is representing a small spot on the target. This might be some sort of reference point you've put on the target, a small 1-inch pasty. It could be the A perforated in the A zone. It could just be your consistency in training and just grabbing a small piece of that target with your eyes. And then, so once you have that point of focus with your vision, you're going to present the gun, and then as you become aware of red or green or whatever the color your sight is, as you become aware of that, you're going to start aggressively pressing that trigger with that hard focus here. So with sight confirmation 1, you're going to use that with your less critical targets, right? The things you perceive as not challenging. So not challenging and not critical, we'll say. So an open target that's within your perceived rate of easy, if you will. Your sight confirmation 2 is going to be your the dot sights intersecting your point of awareness, right? So you're bringing the dot in, and the second you are aware of that dot hitting your point of focus, you're sending that shot. And then confirmation 3 is your sights look like sights, your dot looks like a dot, oriented on your point of focus, right? So if you are looking at this green dot, and let's say this is at 25 meters, 30 meters, 50 meters, whatever, at 50 meters, obviously this 1-inch reference is not going to correlate with your focal, the size of your focal area, but we'll come to that in a second. So with confirmation 1, as you become aware of color coming into the target with that hard visual focus, you're going to break that shot. With your confirmation 2, you're looking for that dot or your sights to meet your point of focus and break the shot. And with confirmation 3, you're looking for your dot to look like a dot, obviously with the natural float you have in your body, but you're looking for the dot to look like a dot over the point of impact you're looking for, so over the point of focus, if you will. Now, that, not original to me. I got that from other people. What I'm not sure if it's original to me, I don't know if I came up with this watching other people's stuff, learning from other people's stuff, or if I heard this somewhere and I can't remember. Don't know. It's not really relevant. But trigger confirmation is going to be the next thing I talk about. The trigger confirmation is typically going to be tied to your level of sight confirmation that you need. So if you are using a level 1 level of sight confirmation, just awareness of the sights with a hard focus on a small part of the target, then you can get away, you're going to try to get away with a very aggressive press on that trigger, because speed is the name of the game at that point. Because of the consistency of inputs you've developed, you know if you bring that sight into your point of awareness and press the trigger, you're going to get a good hit, and you can do that aggressively, probably predictively. We'll talk about predictive maybe later in this video, but we'll certainly have videos on that subject in the future. So you're going to come on the target and you're going to roll on that trigger super aggressive, almost just mashing the trigger. And you're going to do that without disturbing the sights. So even though we're going aggressive on the trigger, doesn't mean we're not controlling the trigger as we do it, right? You're going to develop your grip, and your trigger manipulation to be able to do these things without disturbing the sights. So I'm not sure which of my 3 lenses I'm supposed to be looking at, but I'm just gonna guess on one. I'll just do one on each. So what you're looking for is you're still smashing the trigger, but you're looking for having a perfectly stable sight picture when you do that. Now, is it going to be absolutely bloody perfect? Probably not. You're a human, but that's the goal, right? Now, with confirmation 2, and this doesn't really fit, honestly, a perfect like 1, 2, 3 thing. It's kind of a sliding scale, if you will. But with confirmation 2, you're basically looking for a aggressive roll on the trigger. So that's going to be an aggressive roll under the trigger with a cleaner break on the trigger in correlation to the sights. And then 3 is going to be that traditional, almost a surprise break, but let's step that up a little bit more than usual. So you might have heard of things like trigger prep, where you're going to come to a wall and then roll through. We're not going to do that. We're going to press the trigger one way every single time, just with a different degree of caution, if you will. So maybe it looks more like that, right? So you're rolling through, and what I would gauge would be about a third to a half a second. Just trying to carefully stack that pressure on until that break happens, but not taking your time with it. I don't have this perfectly defined yet. Maybe you guys can help me with that. If you guys have a good idea for naming those, go for it in the comments. And again, I don't know if this is something, obviously this is something everyone innately does, but if we can put names to it, we can build it into our processes and actually articulate what we're trying to accomplish. So now if we can get to a point where we can get that aggressive stack of the trigger to correlate with good results at 50, then you can basically grow out of this. But that's how I perceive it at this moment in time. So now with these dots, what these are representative of is the combination of your sight confirmation and your trigger control. So what we're looking for, especially in dry fire, is for your dot or your sights not to come out of your area of focus. Now, you're obviously not going to have a perfectly rock steady dot because you're not perfectly rock steady. At least I'm not. You have that natural float that happens in your dot. You have a harder time seeing that with your sights, of course, with your iron sights, but trust me, it's probably there. So I heard a archer, I can't remember his name unfortunately, but he's used this term called trust your float. I think that applies beautifully here. But you want to see, the ideal here is that your dot is moving the way that it naturally moves, and you cannot visually articulate when the shot broke, right? There's no interruption of that natural float. If you are, let's say this is your natural float, and then you see a sharp movement out of that float correlated to the break of the trigger, well, that was you. That wasn't just your natural float, probably, unless you have like some weird tick that's in your float, which some people do have, but it probably won't correlate exactly to your trigger press every time, right? So, and what we're looking for is patterns. We kind of do want to see, we want to see these things happening. We want to see the same things happening in dry fire that we see in live fire, right? If you're not doing that, then your dry fire is not actually doing anything for you, because the whole point of the dry fire is to get comfortable and to basically fix the things you find in live, right? Most of us don't have 100,000 rounds a year that we can go and just train all the time. And even if you do, removing the blast and recoil out of the process can let you focus on the nuances that you're trying to work on. So for all of us people that are operating on budgets that we have to adhere to, we have families and such to take care of. In live fire, we're looking to confirm our dry fire, right? So, and if our dry fire is not actually replicating what we see on live fire, then it's not helping us do anything. For a long time, I didn't think dry fire was really all that beneficial. I'd say that, dry fire, yeah, sure. But I wasn't actually replicating my live fire problems in dry. And the reason was because I was going up over my dry fire completely ridiculously. I would go and do bill drills or whatever I'm doing at the time at the range, and then my dry fire would look something like this. Yep, that was a good break. Yep, that was a good break. So that wasn't articulate. That was not replicating anything, right? Now, if you guys have seen my other videos, you've seen the zip tie trick. Now, at least with the Glock pistols, if you take a normal small zip tie and put that into the barrel of your pistol with the action lock open, obviously clear your pistol and everything first. These pistols were well cleared before this video started. And I'm gonna go out the side on this because I have irons on this guy, or I guess I have plastics on this guy. You get what I'm saying? So, and that's going to hold the pistol just slightly out of battery, and that's how you can actuate your pistol trigger without it clicking over and going dead, right? And is that going to perfectly mimic your trigger brake? No, but your trigger brake often has very little to do with the problems that you're putting into the trigger. Typically, they're going to be tension related, and you're looking to isolate those feelings in your hand as you manipulate the trigger. You want to be able to isolate the finger moving from, you don't want to see movement like that where you can see my other fingers moving. You want to see everything move independently or not move, and the trigger finger move independently of the hand, right? Okay, so with that, I think we've covered the topic well enough. Now, how do you do that? How do you develop these things? How do you practice these things? So I think that's the natural thing to talk about next. So first, I want to start with the grip. I think it makes sense. Now, we're all probably familiar with the old adage that, you should have the firearm following your forearm. That may or may not be helpful. I don't find it to be helpful. What I have seen and what I have found is that if you position the firearm in your dominant hand, whichever hand that is, in such a way that you enable good actuation of the trigger innately, you can gain a lot of ground by that simple tweak in your grip, and then start working on your trigger control. So I'll use the Glock 20 for this because it doesn't have the zip tie. So what you're looking for is you basically just need a trial and error. Find a small thing that you can focus on, clear out your handgun, magazine out, rack the slide and lock it open, verify your barrel, breech area, magazine wells, all clear of ammunition, separate yourself from any ammunition, all the normal dry fire stuff, right? And then set up a small 1-inch target at, 5 yards or whatever, 20 feet. 20 feet, I know that's not 5 yards, but just work with here. So whether you're using iron sights or you're using a dot, bring your firearm into your awareness and press that trigger so that, and then just work on slight movements of the gun articulated in your grip, rotating in and out, right? Presenting different amounts of your trigger finger to the grip. Experiment with the tension in your hand, how you're thinking about grabbing the gun, what points of tension you're bringing in. You just play with it until you find a method that, now on this gun I already know how I want to hold it more or less. So until you find a way that you can press that trigger pretty darn good without really thinking about it, just roll through super aggressive and see what works for you. And once you find we'll put it like this. Treat it like a slider, right? Treat the gun, the rotation like a sliding bar, and see where your easiest trigger control is. And then once you find that, set that as a standard, find that spot in your hand, and then think, okay, what are my cues for exactly this, right? What do I feel with reference to the trigger guard on the knuckle of my middle finger? What do I feel with the beaver tail, so to speak? What do I feel with that on the web of my hand? What do I feel in my palm in reference to however your pistol grip is shaped, right? Like if you have a Glock and it has a hump, where do I feel that lining with my hand? And then get 2 or 3 cues on your hand that can act as sight references for your hand to your gun, right? So that when you grab it out of the holster, you have a point of contact you're looking for that you can look to make consistently, and you can cue in on that when you're coming out of the holster, right? Then, of course, likewise with your support hand, figure out how you want to get that hand on there. Start working on the trigger in dry fire. Then when you have an opportunity, go to the range. And then with that positioning, of your hands, start playing with your tensions and how you fluctuate your tension in your support hand on your dominant hand, and see what is going to give you the best combination of recoil control, and trigger control at that same time. And once you build that awareness of what those things are, look for those same cues, and then bring that back to the holster and build that from the holster, right? Whether you're articulating that as building your grip as early as possible, which is what I would sort of recommend at this point in time. But however you're articulating it in your head, get those cues cemented in your hands, what it should feel like to get a good grip, a grip that's going to encourage consistency of trigger manipulation, of return from recoil, and that's the starting point. Then working on the consistent presentation. Now, a dot will kind of force your hand to be consistent, but there's degrees of consistency. Simply having the dot appear in the window is sort of the starting point. You don't want to find yourself looking for the dot. If you're looking for the dot, there's a high chance you're going to focus on the dot, which you don't want to do. You want to be focused on that small spot on the target, and you don't want to find yourself looking for something, because if you're looking for something, where's your focus? It's on looking for it, right? So you need to build that that presentation to be indexed perfectly with your body. So the starting point, presenting the gun with a hard focus on the target, and having a dot that you can bring into your awareness and to the point of focus. Once you have that, you want to start focusing on that dot being centered up on the thing you're focused on in the presentation. So that's what I'm working on right now personally, is having a consistent presentation that every single time comes out dot centered in the window on the thing I'm looking at, right? Now, if you start developing that presentation to be consistent like that, you may start noticing with fluctuation in tension, with grip tension or bodily tension, that you kind of bury the sight and have the dot floating high in the window. You may notice that in dry fire as you're going through like a build drill, where you start bearing down on the gun, trying to like really hold it in place. The way I notice tension most commonly is the dot rising in the window as I start bearing down on the gun, which you don't want to do. Obviously that's bad, but as tension creeps in, that's how I start noticing it visually. So with that, your tension should be from the elbows forward. You don't want bodily tension through here. You're not fighting the gun to just eliminate all movement. You're letting the gun do its thing and returning it aggressively in live. In dry fire, there is no recoil force, hopefully, right? So there is no recoil force in dry fire. So that is one of the things that you have to work in live. You can get, at least for me, I have found that a very disciplined dry fire routine can just get you innate results in live, but you have to be exceedingly aware of your grip tensions at all times. Whatever your tension is for that good recoil management, you need to have it. You need to have every single piece of it and not an ounce more, and you need to be very careful not to transgress that principle in dry fire. If you start getting lazy in dry fire, that's when you start getting those, whoa, that's what recoil feels like moments when you first go back to the range, right? And you don't want that. But if you're getting that, whoa, that's what recoil feels like feeling when you shoot your gun for the first time in a while, you are doing dry fire incorrectly. You're getting lazy on your grip. So probably. Okay, guys, so we just went over all the things we want to talk about with how to perceive these things. Let's go over how to actually work on them. So we have the Glock 45 here, of course, cleared of ammunition. Now, the first drill I want to talk about is shot on demand or trigger control at speed. I've heard it called both things. I love this drill. This is a great drill for development. So what you're going to do is you're going to take a shot timer. You're going to set it to a random part time if you don't have someone to help you. If you do have someone to help you, have it set on instant and they can beep it for you. But clip the shot timer wherever you're going to clip it on yourself, or put it on a table next to you, and hit the button. Get your grip set in a way that you deem is acceptable. focus on a small point of the target with a sight level confirmation of 3, i.e. steady dot on the centered over your point of focus, right? And then when the shot timer goes off, beep, they typically are 0.3 second long beeps. You want to break the shot before the beep is over, okay? And you want to feel for the tensions in your hands and watch for sight movement. Now, if the float is inside of that small area, and then keep in mind that these are just for kind of reference of like how I would gauge my frustration with myself if I come out of here. So if I come out of here, that's a little annoying. Okay, hey Doug, start watching that. Okay, you're really starting to transgress that trigger control, right? So if your natural float stays like that, the tip of the marker, and it goes beep click, and you can't discern visually when the break happened, I would gauge that as good. If you start seeing a pattern where beep click, you slash into the yellow, so to speak, you won't actually have these. If you'd like this little reference target, feel free to email me, and I'll get you one. But as a PDF, you'll have to print it, obviously. But anyway, so beep click, and then you don't see any perceived movement in the dot, then I would gauge that as good. If you start seeing those divots into the deeper out of the point of focus, then you want to start going through the process and really focusing on what is happening in your hands to cause that blip in the sight, right? Now, the next thing I will talk about is taking your handgun. If you're using a Glock pattern handgun, this is accurate. If you're not using a Glock pattern handgun, you may need to play around with this, assuming it's a striker fired handgun. But so far, and I've only got the experience I have, but with the Glock and the CZP-10C, you can get this to work. I can't speak to other platforms or aftermarket triggers. Sorry, I just don't have exposure to those things. So, but what you're gonna do is set up a zip tie through the breech, and then it's gonna just basically hold the gun slightly out of battery so that you can manipulate the trigger over and over. And then you're just going to basically do bill drills, or you can even do like just 2 aggressive presses, call it 2 shots or 3 shots or 6 shots on demand, and then set yourself an aggressive par that you want to keep yourself in. Let's say from your time at the range that an aggressive trigger press for you is 0.2 seconds, right? Then you know that you want to break that first shot within the 0.3 second beep, okay? So let's just say 0.3. And then you're gonna do 5 additional shots. So 0.3 plus 1 second worth of shots, 0.2 times 5. So 6 shots total. The one was at 0.3, right? And then the additional 5 are gonna take 1 whole second with a 0.2 press. That's gonna give you 1.3 seconds total for the drill. Take that time and take a tenth or so off, right? So take 1.1, 1.2, and try to beat that par time with your with the repetitions, right? And that's going to force you to get out of your comfort zone, and that pressure in dry is what's going to start hopefully showing you those same things you see in live. So let's say if you start getting after it, you start kind of pulling your shots down here, then you should see your dot floating down occasionally to that problem area, right? So now if you're using iron sights, let's talk about that. So with iron sights, you still want to use target focus when you're shooting. You're not shooting right now. You're training a very specific thing. You're training a specific point of the process. So with this point of dry, even though you shoot target focused, if you're using iron sights, I would recommend to use a front sight focus for this development. You're not going to implement this into your live fire. It's just so you can be completely aware of any movement in your sights, because obviously the iron sights don't tend to tell you as much information as your red dot will. So with the red dot, you can stay focused here and you are perfectly aware of what's going on with that red dot as it happens. At least you should be. With an iron sight setup or a plastic sight setup, it's much harder to discern that movement, right? But if you focus on the front sight as you're working that trigger assessment, then you can try to be more aware of what's going on, right? So give that a try. See if it helps you kind of see that slight movement in the sights as you're going. Iron sights can really lie to you in dry fire, and because if you're not really paying attention to those sights, then they can move a pretty decent amount and you be completely unaware that it's happening, right? So that's why a lot of people, when they pick up a dot for the first time, they're like, whoa, that's shaky, right? Well, your pistol's moving the exact same. Like, there's no machine inside the red dot that's causing vibration for your hands. That movement's there in the irons, but it's harder to discern with those blocky irons, right? They're just a more coarse aiming solution. So you don't, like, if you take a caliper and you take a roller, you can discern the lack of precision in a measurement between the two, with the roller, right? But if you don't have the perspective of having the caliper, you can't discern how imprecise you're being with the roller. Hopefully that makes sense. And your iron sights versus red dot are very similar to like a ruler versus a caliper as far as being aware of the movement and input you're putting on the gun, which is the main reason I like red dots as much as I do, because the amount of growth they can give you in training, especially dry fire training, and then when you bring that to a live fire or you bring that into real life, you can be aware of these things as they're happening in real life, right? Which is very helpful to me. And as you develop these processes, you will become aware of that dot movement real time, and you can make real time corrections to what you're seeing and actually implement that on target, which is really super cool. But yeah, so if you're doing this with your iron sights, not a problem. Just make sure you're doing your absolute best to focus on those sights and make sure that you're aware of any movement you're inputting into the system, because those sights will lie to you if you let them. They'll whisper sweet nothings right in your ear. So there's 2 drills I have found really helpful for working on these things, and then you're going to want to take the consistency of the grip, the consistency of the presentation, make that all continually developing, and then start being aware of those things also when you start doing other things. If you're working build drills, blade drills, working on movement, you can add in or add out or subtract out your focus on different aspects of what you're trying to accomplish. Whether you're working on movement, you can do the movement and see how your trigger presses are holding up during the movement, or you can run the entire drill with your finger index on the slide and never touch your trigger and only focus on the movement, right? Focus on individual things as you commit to dry fire so that you can actually focus and start implementing change that's meaningful, and then over time you start seeing the progress build, right? Hopefully this has been helpful. I know it's kind of long, but this is the stuff I want to talk about, and for those of you that are still watching, you are the one I made this video for, not the people that come on for 15 seconds. So let me know down below what you think about this, if you found any of it helpful, and let me know if you've implemented it and what you found. Shalom.